Okay, so continuing here. So common pool goods. There's this super famous, story's the wrong word about it. British political philosopher, economist, was trying to explain what common pool resources were. And so he told this story about the commons. So in ancient England, I guess in the village, there was like a central pasture that like no one person owned. It was like the town's pasture, I guess. And everybody could bring their like sheep and cows and stuff to the pasture to graze during the day. I think there was a rule on like how many livestock you could bring to the pasture, because obviously there's only so much grass in the pasture, and if people brought too much livestock, they would use up all the grass. And so what this economist was trying to say is that for an individual farmer dude, if he brings a couple extra livestock to the commons, he actually stands to profit a lot. If selling milk or sheep's wool or whatever was like how you made a living, then it was actually pretty profitable for you as an individual to try to sneak on a few extra livestock. Nobody could really tell whose livestock belonged to who when they were all in the pasture during the day, I guess. And so it was really hard to catch people who brought extra livestock. So there's this incentive structure where, if I'm a farmer, there's a really strong incentive for me to bring 2 or 3 extra livestock, because for me personally, I stand to make a lot of money off that. And then the damage that just my extra 2 or 3 livestock do to the commons is pretty small and negligible. So the individual cost or individual benefit is huge. Is large. So the individual benefit is large, and the social cost from one person is small. What this leads to is what is called the free rider problem. So this leads to free riders in a system. So what ends up happening is that, well, if this incentive is true for me as a farmer, it's actually true for all of the farmers. So what happens is that every farmer is like, oh, well, if I sneak on a few extra cattle, I can make a lot of extra money, and it won't, my 2 or 3 extra cattle aren't going to hurt the commons. But then when everybody starts doing it, the commons are destroyed. And so the tragedy of the commons is a story about how the difference between incentives for an individual and collective outcomes, when everybody starts behaving in a certain way, can destroy a natural resource or a common good. So this is a weird story about like cattle and pastures and that sort of thing. But this actually comes up a lot in a lot of different industries. It actually, I can think of cases where it comes up in Murray. The cafeteria is like a prime example. So in the cafeteria, you're supposed to clean up your tray and clean up after yourself. Evidently there are a decent number of students at the school who don't care to do that. To them, personally, it's a great benefit to just leave it there, leave it on the table and leave a mess. Their one tray is not completely soiling the entire cafeteria. So it's a great benefit to them individually to just be able to walk away, save some time. Maybe they don't like cleaning up. And then socially, collectively, that one tray is not a super big deal. But the problem is that if a lot of people think that way, then people leave trays everywhere, and it creates a lot of work for other people. So you can think of our cafeteria as a commons. Any kind of situation where people are jointly using a resource where it's hard to police or enforce how much people are using or how they're treating it, gives rise to these situations and creates an incentive for people to free ride the system, where they actually take more than they're supposed to, and it's hard to catch them and all that stuff. So that's why a lot of times for these types of resources, the government will step in. Hunting licenses and like hunting seasons and fishing rules about like you can't keep a fish unless it's a certain size. All of those things are in place to protect common pool resources, to try to prevent free riders and this free rider problem from just destroying all of the goods. Okay, so I wanted to tack on to what we were talking about before break. So we looked at taxes and subsidies before break, and we saw that in a market for a private good, if the government imposes a tax or subsidizes a good, it creates a deadweight loss. So one of the questions we had when we left for break is like, why would the government ever impose a tax or a subsidy if it's going to create a deadweight loss and the economy or that market is going to be worse off overall? And so part of the answer is because of public goods and common pool goods. The government needs money to provide public goods. So like, the government needs money to finance national defense. The government needs money to build roads, and so the government will impose taxes in order to raise money for that. And even though a tax may actually leave a specific market worse off, there will be a deadweight loss. As a society, we might decide, okay, well, it's worth it to, just kind of eat this deadweight loss in the market for, chicken or something like that. So let's say the government's going to tax chicken in order to fund national defense. We might say, we're going to go ahead and take the hit and just eat this deadweight loss in the chicken market because we like national defense. So a lot of the reasons that the government gets into taxation and all that sort of stuff is to provide these public goods and protect common pool resources that the private sector would never provide or safeguard because it's not profitable for a private firm to do it. And that's about it for this. Like I said, this is just some vocab about the 4 different types of goods: private goods, public goods, club goods, and common pool resources. In the next video, we're going to look at something called externalities, and we'll talk a little bit more about how taxes and subsidies can also be used to correct a market in that situation. So that's about it. Thanks y'all for listening. Talk to you soon.